My name is Max. I'm 28 years old, and I translate the chaotic noise of the world into clean, elegant lines of code and predictive models. As a senior data analyst for a thriving tech firm in Austin, Texas, my life is governed by logic, patterns, and the serene certainty of a well-executed algorithm. I can look at a billion points of raw data and find the narrative hidden within, the signal in the noise. It's a skill that has brought me professional success, a corner office with a panoramic view of the rolling Texas hills, and a salary that allows me to live comfortably. But the one data set I've never been able to parse is my own family. My home, if you can call it that, is a sprawling, minimalist masterpiece of glass and white stone in the West Lake Hills, a monument to my father's success in architectural design. To an outsider, it's a picture of modern familial bliss. There's my father, Arthur, a man whose quiet demeanor and artistic sensibilities are perpetually overshadowed by a cloud of weary placation. There's my stepmother, Victoria, a woman sculpted from ice and ambition, whose smile never quite reaches her calculating eyes. And then there are my half-siblings, Leo and Chloe, 10 and 12 years my junior, respectively. They are Victoria's children, extensions of her own polished entitlement, who have been expertly taught to view me as a piece of furniture that came with the house. Useful, perhaps, but not truly part of the decor. I am the ghost of my father's first marriage. The living, breathing reminder of Eleanor, the woman I've been told was a beautiful, brilliant, but hopelessly unstable artist who shattered my father's heart and then vanished from my life when I was 5, leaving nothing behind but a whispered legacy of chaos. She couldn't handle responsibility, Max, my father would say on the rare occasions her name came up, his gaze drifting to some distant point over my shoulder. It was better this way. Victoria gave us stability. She gave me stability. Victoria's version was always more pointed, delivered with the subtle venom of a perfectly placed stiletto. Your father was a broken man when I found him, she'd tell her friends at lavish dinner parties, while I was expected to sit silently and nod. He needed a strong partner, not a flighty dreamer. I built this family from the ashes. In her narrative, she was the savior, and I was the last piece of debris from the fire that she'd graciously allowed to remain. This feeling of being an appendix, a footnote in the family's primary text, has been the defining algorithm of my existence. I am included in family portraits, but always positioned at the edge, slightly out of the main composition. I am invited to family vacations to Aspen or the Amalfi Coast, but my presence feels more like a contractual obligation than a desire for my company. Leo and Chloe receive custom-made skis and designer outfits. I get a polite inquiry if my existing gear is still adequate. The difference is never overt enough to be a clear injustice, but it's a constant, low-frequency hum of exclusion that I've learned to live with. My room, while spacious and well-appointed, is in a separate wing of the house, the former guest suite. It's quiet, isolated. It keeps me, and the ghost of my mother that I carry, neatly contained. My only true sanctuary, my only data point of unconditional love, comes through the crackling connection of a phone call to Santa Fe, New Mexico. My Uncle David, my father's older brother, is the family's designated black sheep. A wild-haired, paint-splattered artist who fled the corporate world decades ago. He is everything my father is not: loud, unapologetic, and fiercely loyal. He was close with my mother, Eleanor. He's the only one who ever speaks of her with warmth. She had a laugh that could fill a canyon, kid, he told me once, his voice raspy over the phone. And she loved you more than sunlight. Don't you ever let them convince you otherwise. Then why did she leave? I'd asked, the question a familiar stone in my throat. There would always be a pause, a hesitation heavy with unspoken words. Life's complicated, Max. People make choices they think are right at the time. It's not always black and white. It was a non-answer, but it was delivered with a kindness that felt more truthful than all of Victoria's carefully constructed narratives. He was my signal in the noise. Every holiday, a hand-carved wooden figure or a small, abstract painting would arrive from him, addressed only to me. These were the only gifts I kept on display, small totems of a connection that felt real. I've spent my life trying to overwrite the algorithm of my otherness. If I couldn't be loved for who I was, I would be respected for what I could achieve. I became a model son. I never caused trouble, earned perfect grades, and excelled in my career with a single-minded focus. My achievements were met with muted approval. An acceptance letter to UT Austin with a full scholarship earned a curt, "Well done, Max," from my father over dinner. My first major project success at work got a thin smile from Victoria and the comment, "It's good you're so self-sufficient." Each accomplishment was supposed to be a step closer to the family's inner circle, but it felt more like I was just building a more impressive, more distant pedestal to stand on. Now, I'm on the cusp of the biggest achievement of my career, a promotion to Director of Analytics. It's a position that comes with a significant stake in the company, a title that commands respect. This, I tell myself, will be different. This is undeniable. This is a success so significant that even Victoria will have to acknowledge it. My father will have to look at me, really look at me, and feel a surge of pride that can't be muted or managed. This promotion is my master algorithm, the one I've been coding my entire life. It's the key that will finally unlock the door to the family, and I am terrifyingly, desperately close to turning it. I just have to hope the lock isn't rusted shut. The architecture of my childhood memories is built on a foundation of subtle omissions and carefully curated truths. It's not a landscape of overt cruelty, but one of persistent, chilling exclusion. I remember when I was 10, my father, Victoria, and a newly toddling Leo went to Disney World. I was told it was a last-minute trip and that it would be too much of a hassle to pull me out of school. I spent the week with a babysitter in that vast, silent house, tracing the flight path from Austin to Orlando on a globe in my father's study. When they returned, their skin sun-kissed and their suitcases bulging with souvenirs, Victoria handed me a generic Mickey Mouse keychain. "We thought of you," she'd said, her smile as bright and artificial as the theme park itself. Leo was wearing a miniature Goofy hat, and in the family photo they placed on the mantle, the three of them looked perfect, complete. There was no space in the frame for another child. This pattern repeated itself through the years. My academic award ceremonies were often missed due to unavoidable scheduling conflicts. My high school graduation party was a small, subdued affair tacked onto the end of a much grander garden party Victoria was hosting for her charity circle. My achievements were always an afterthought, a minor bullet point on the family's weekly agenda. My half-siblings, by contrast, were celebrated with operatic fervor. Chloe's first-place ribbon in a pony riding competition was framed and given pride of place in the living room. Leo's participation trophy for soccer was treated like the World Cup. Their lives were the main feature. Mine was the B-movie playing in a secondary theater. The official narrative about my mother, Eleanor, was the cornerstone of this architecture. It was the load-bearing wall that supported Victoria's position as matriarch and justified my father's emotional distance. She was brilliant, but she had demons, Max, Arthur would sigh, a phrase that was both a compliment and a condemnation. Her art was everything to her. There wasn't room for anything else, not really. The story was that she had simply walked away, unable to cope with the domesticity of motherhood, lured away by the promise of an unencumbered artistic life in some unnamed city. It was a clean, simple story. A tragedy, yes, but one with a clear, blameless victim, my father, and a clear, selfish villain, my mother. But there were glitches in this narrative, inconsistencies that my analytical mind couldn't ignore. I was about 12 when I found one. I was looking for a book in my father's home office and stumbled upon an old portfolio tucked away on a high shelf. It was filled with sketches. They were incredible, charcoal and ink drawings of landscapes, faces, and hands. They were expressive and raw, full of a life that felt starkly different from the sterile perfection of our home. On the inside cover, in elegant, looping script, was the name Eleanor Vance. My mother's name. I felt a jolt, a forbidden thrill. But tucked inside the portfolio was a single, folded letter. It was from Uncle David, dated just after she'd left. "Arthur," it read, "what you've allowed to happen is a travesty. Victoria has poisoned you. Kicking Eleanor out, cutting her off like that, you're destroying 2 lives to save your own fragile peace. She loves that boy. Don't you dare let your new wife erase her. You will regret this for the rest of your life." I read it 3 times, my heart hammering against my ribs. Kicking Eleanor out. Not leaving. Being kicked out. The words reconfigured everything. I quickly put the letter back, my hands trembling. I never mentioned it to my father. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that asking about it would be like introducing a virus into the family's operating system. It would be detected and eliminated, and my access privileges would be even further restricted. So I held that knowledge like a secret key, a piece of code that hinted at a completely different program running beneath the surface. Victoria was the master architect of my isolation. Her methods were never overt. She was too smart for that. It was always couched in concern. Max is so independent, isn't he? He prefers to be on his own, she'd say to guests. We don't want to smother him. It was a brilliant strategy. It painted her as a sensitive, caring stepmother while simultaneously reinforcing my otherness. She would forget to tell me about a family outing until it was too late for me to join. She would buy Leo and Chloe tickets to a concert she knew I'd love, then claim she didn't realize it was my kind of music. Each instance was a small, precise incision, expertly placed so that the wound was internal, invisible. My father was complicit in his silence. I see now that he was a man trapped between his past guilt and his present comfort. Confronting Victoria would have meant dismantling the peaceful, orderly world she had built for him. It would have meant acknowledging his own weakness, his own failure to protect his first wife and his firstborn son. So he chose the path of least resistance. He chose peace over truth. He let Victoria manage the family narrative, and by extension, my place within it. His love for me was real, I think, but it was a passive, dormant love, buried under layers of regret and fear. Uncle David was the one person who saw through the facade. Our monthly calls were my reality check. He'd ask about school, my friends, my projects, with a genuine interest that felt like a gulp of fresh air after being in a vacuum. And he was the only one who kept Eleanor's memory alive in a way that wasn't a cautionary tale. You have her eyes, you know, he'd say. And her hands. Artist's hands. You might be a data whiz, but you've got her soul in there somewhere. He never pushed, never revealed more than he thought I could handle, but he planted seeds of doubt about the official story. He was tending to a part of me that everyone else was trying to pave over. He was my link to a past I wasn't allowed to claim, and my hope for a future where I might finally understand it. Now, with this promotion, I felt like I was on the verge of forcing that understanding into the light. This achievement was so concrete, so unassailable, that it would have to be acknowledged. It would force my father to see me not as a relic of his past, but as the architect of my own successful future. And maybe, just maybe, it would be enough to make him finally tell me the truth. The project that paved the way for my promotion was codenamed Chrysalis. It was an ironic name, chosen by a marketing team that loved buzzwords, but for me, it became deeply personal. For 6 months, I lived inside that project. The goal was to develop a new predictive analytics engine for our largest e-commerce client, an engine that could anticipate consumer behavior with unprecedented accuracy. It was a monstrously complex task, involving petabytes of data, machine learning, and the kind of deep-focused problem-solving that made the rest of the world fade away. For me, Chrysalis was more than a professional challenge. It was a self-imposed exile that served a dual purpose. At the office, I was building my future. At home, I was avoiding my present. The long hours, often stretching past midnight, fueled by lukewarm coffee and the hum of servers, became a convenient and unimpeachable excuse. I could miss the strained family dinners, the weekend outings I was only half invited to, the general atmosphere of being tolerated rather than wanted. Max is just so dedicated, Victoria would say with a sigh that was equal parts feigned admiration and genuine relief. His work is his life. She wasn't wrong, but she had no idea why. My team consisted of 4 other analysts, all brilliant in their own right. But I was the lead, the architect of the system. I didn't just manage, I immersed myself. I spent weeks sleeping on a couch in my office, my dreams filled with flowing data streams and branching logical trees. I'd wake up and scribble equations on a whiteboard before the sun rose over the Austin skyline. The project became an extension of my own mind, a world where I had complete control, where every variable was accounted for, and where success was determined by merit, not by the shifting allegiances of a broken family. It was clean. It was fair. There were moments of near failure. A catastrophic bug in the initial code sent us scrambling for 72 hours straight. A key data set was corrupted, forcing us to rebuild a month's worth of work. During those crises, I felt a strange sense of calm. Here, the problems were identifiable. They could be isolated, analyzed, and solved. There was a solution if you were smart enough and persistent enough to find it. This was the polar opposite of my life at home, where the problem was an amorphous fog of unspoken resentments and carefully constructed lies, a problem with no clear solution. As we neared the finish line, the pressure intensified. The client was getting anxious, and our CEO was watching closely. This project was a high-stakes gamble for the company. I remember one particularly grueling week where I barely left the office. I called home once to let them know I wouldn't be there for Chloe's piano recital. "Oh, that's a shame," Victoria said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Chloe will be so disappointed." I could hear Chloe in the background asking who was on the phone, and Victoria replying in a stage whisper, "It's just Max. He's working. Just Max." The two words erased any sense of familial obligation, reframing my absence not as a sacrifice for a shared future, but as the selfish choice of an outsider. I hung up the phone, the familiar cold not tightening in my stomach. But instead of letting it consume me, I channeled it. I turned back to my monitor, the lines of code a comforting, logical embrace. I would show them. This work, this success, would be my response. It would be my voice in a house where I was perpetually silenced. My father, Arthur, would occasionally poke his head into my life with a question. "Everything going all right with that big project, son?" The word son felt awkward in his mouth, a borrowed term. "It's going well," I'd say, keeping my tone even. "It's a lot of work, but I think it's going to be a game changer for the company." "Good, good," he'd nod, his eyes already drifting away, his mind on a new building design, or, more likely, on what Victoria wanted for dinner. He saw my work ethic as a positive trait, but I don't think he ever understood the desperation fueling it. He saw a responsible adult, not a son screaming for his attention in the only way he knew how. Finally, the day of the final presentation arrived. We gathered in the main boardroom with the client's executive team and our own CEO. I stood before them, walking them through the architecture of Chrysalis. I explained the algorithms, demonstrated the live model, and presented the results of our beta testing, which had surpassed all expectations. The engine wasn't just predictive, it was practically prescient. As I finished, there was a moment of stunned silence, followed by an eruption of applause. The client's CEO stood up, shook my hand, and called the work revolutionary. My own CEO, a man not known for hyperbole, beamed. Walking out of that boardroom, I felt a dizzying sense of triumph. It was done. I had succeeded. Later that day, my CEO called me into his office. "Max," he said, leaning back in his chair, "the board is ecstatic. We're promoting you to Director of Analytics, effective immediately. We're also giving you a substantial bonus and stock options. You've earned it." I walked out of his office and into the late afternoon sun, the official offer letter in my hand. This was it. The key. The undeniable proof of my worth. My heart was hammering, not just from the professional victory, but from the personal one I was sure would follow. I pulled out my phone, my fingers trembling slightly as I composed a group text to my father, Victoria, Leo, and Chloe. "Incredible news," I wrote. "I've just been promoted to director. I'd love to take everyone out for a celebration dinner tomorrow night to say thank you for all your support. I'll make a reservation at Uchi. My treat." I hit send, a wave of hopeful, terrifying anticipation washing over me. This was my moment to finally be seen, to be celebrated not as an obligation, but as a son who had made his family proud. The response from my father came a few minutes later. "Congratulations, Max. That's wonderful news. We'd love to." I read the words over and over, a smile spreading across my face. "We'd love to." For the first time, it felt like a genuine we. The algorithm was finally working. The feeling of hope was so potent it was almost disorienting. For the next 24 hours, I walked around in a state of buoyant excitement, a feeling I hadn't experienced since I was a small child. The promotion was the validation I craved professionally, but the celebratory dinner was what truly mattered. It was symbolic. It was a chance to reset the family dynamic, to sit together at a table not as a man, his wife, his children, and his other son, but simply as a family. My family. I chose Uchi with deliberate care. It wasn't just one of Austin's most acclaimed restaurants. It was a place of artistry and precision, a culinary experience that felt like a fitting reflection of the work I did. It was sophisticated, a place Victoria couldn't dismiss as uncultured. It was expensive, a clear statement that this was my gesture, funded by my success. I wanted everything to be perfect. I called the restaurant and made a reservation for 5 at 7:30 p.m. Is this for a special occasion? The hostess asked politely. Yes, I said, the word catching in my throat with a surprising amount of emotion. It's a celebration. For a promotion. The rest of the day was a blur of preparations, both logistical and mental. I left work early, a rare indulgence, and went to buy a new shirt, a crisp, dark blue button-down that made me feel more like a director and less like the kid still trying to earn a spot at the grown-ups table. I got a haircut. I even rehearsed what I would say in my head, a small toast to thank them for their support, even though the words felt hollow and untrue. But tonight, I thought, I could make them true. Tonight was about the future, not the past. At home, the atmosphere was deceptively normal. Victoria offered a tight, polite smile. Congratulations on your promotion, Max. That's very impressive. It was the same tone she used to compliment the gardener on the state of the hedges. My father clapped me on the shoulder, his touch light and fleeting. Director, huh? Knew you had it in you. He seemed genuinely pleased, but his eyes were already glancing towards the television where a golf tournament was playing. Leo and Chloe were indifferent, absorbed in their iPads, their world a universe away from mine. Still, I held on to my optimism. They had agreed to come. That was the main thing. I arrived at Uchi at 7:15 p.m., 15 minutes early. The restaurant was beautiful, a blend of warm wood and sleek, modern design. The low lighting cast a soft glow, and the air buzzed with quiet conversation and the clinking of glasses. It felt important. I gave my name at the host's stand, and they led me to a perfect round table in a quiet corner of the main dining room. 5 place settings, 5 menus, 5 empty chairs. I sat down, my hands clasped on the table in front of me. I felt a nervous energy thrumming through me. I imagined them walking in, my father looking proud, Victoria looking impressed, even Leo and Chloe looking up from their screens for a moment. I pictured the conversation, the shared plates of exquisite sushi, the sake. I pictured a moment, just one moment, of shared, uncomplicated happiness. 7:30 p.m. came and went. The restaurant was filling up now. The table next to me, a group of friends celebrating a birthday, erupted in laughter. I checked my phone. Nothing. At 7:45 p.m., a prickle of anxiety started to creep up my spine. They were probably just stuck in traffic. Austin traffic was notoriously bad. I texted the group chat. Hey, I'm here at the table. Hope you guys aren't having trouble finding parking. I watched the screen, waiting for the 3 little dots that would signal a reply. Nothing. The waiter came by. Can I get you started with something to drink while you wait for your party? He asked, his smile professional and kind. I'll just have some water for now. Thanks, I said, trying to keep my voice from sounding as tight as I felt. They should be here any minute. At 8 p.m., the anxiety had blossomed into a familiar, cold dread. I stared at the 5 empty chairs, each one a silent accusation. The birthday party next to me was now singing. A couple across the room was holding hands, lost in their own world. The entire restaurant seemed to be a vibrant tableau of connection and celebration, and I was a black and white photograph of solitude at its center. I felt the eyes of the staff on me, their professional kindness slowly curdling into pity. The single diner stood up by his entire family. My meticulously planned celebration was transforming into a public humiliation. I tried calling my father's cell. It rang, and then went to voicemail. Hey, Dad, I said, my voice strained. It's 8 o'clock. I'm at the restaurant. Is everything okay? Give me a call back. I tried Victoria. Her phone didn't even ring. It went straight to voicemail. I scrolled through my contacts, my thumb hovering over Uncle David's name. I wanted to call him, to hear his gruff, reassuring voice. But I couldn't. Admitting this failure to him felt like admitting that everything he'd warned me about was true, that my hope had been foolish all along. The waiter returned, his expression now one of gentle concern. Sir, would you like to perhaps order something for yourself? The kitchen will be taking last orders for some items soon. The polite, professional question shattered my last shred of composure. My perfect evening, my meticulously coded plan for acceptance, had failed to execute. It had crashed, and I was sitting alone in the wreckage. The dread that had been slowly coiling in my gut finally tightened into a knot of pure, cold certainty. They were not coming. This wasn't about traffic or a dead phone battery. This was a choice. My grand gesture, my offering of success, had been rejected. I finally received a text message at 8:15 p.m. It wasn't a call, not an apology, just a sterile, dismissive text from my father. "So sorry, Max, something came up with Chloe. Not feeling well. We had to stay home. Rain check. Rain check." The word was an insult. It was the kind of casual postponement you offer a colleague for a coffee meeting, not the apology you give your son after abandoning him on one of the biggest nights of his life. And as I stared at the text, I heard it. A faint sound from the other end of the line before the call disconnected on his end. The unmistakable sound of Leo laughing in the background, followed by the tinny audio of a video game. Chloe wasn't sick. They were at home, carrying on with their evening as if this one had never been scheduled. As if I didn't exist. My own personal data set, the one I had been trying to analyze my whole life, suddenly snapped into focus. The signal wasn't hidden. It had been screaming at me all along. I was not part of the equation. I was a rounding error they periodically had to account for. "Sir." The waiter was back, his voice softer now. He knew. Everyone in the restaurant who had glanced my way knew. Could I just get the check for the water?" I asked, my voice a hoarse whisper. My throat felt like it was closing up. I couldn't bear to stay another second in that beautiful room, a living monument to my own foolishness. "Of course, sir. It's on the house," he said with a kindness that almost broke me. I stood up, my legs feeling unsteady. I walked out of the restaurant, past the laughing families and romantic couples, and into the warm Austin night. I didn't go home. I couldn't face that house, couldn't face the quiet triumph I would surely see in Victoria's eyes. Instead, I drove to the one place in the city that had always felt like a neutral ground, the Pfluger pedestrian bridge. I walked to the middle of the bridge, leaning against the railing and staring down at the dark, shimmering water of Lady Bird Lake. The Austin skyline glittered in front of me, a city full of life and connection, and I had never felt more alone. The hope that had buoyed me for the last 24 hours had evaporated, leaving behind a hollow, aching void. I had spent my entire life trying to earn my place, coding my existence for their approval, and for what? To be left alone in a fancy restaurant with 5 empty chairs. The anger came first, a hot, bitter wave. Anger at my father for his weakness, at Victoria for her casual cruelty, at myself for being so naive, for believing that this time would be different. But the anger quickly dissolved into a profound, crushing sadness. It was the grief of a 5-year-old boy who didn't understand why his mother was gone, and the grief of a 28-year-old man who finally understood that his father had, in his own way, left him too. I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking. I didn't know who to call or what to say. I just felt a desperate need to connect with someone, to send a signal out into the void and know that someone would receive it. My thumb scrolled to Uncle David's name. I couldn't bring myself to call, to have my voice break over the phone. I just sent a short, cryptic text. "You were right." I didn't expect a reply right away. It was late, and he was 2 states away. But my phone buzzed almost instantly. It wasn't a text. He was calling. I stared at the screen, at his name glowing against the dark background. I let it ring once, twice. Then I finally swiped to answer, unable to form a word. "Max." His voice was sharp with concern, cutting through the static of my despair. "Max, what happened? Talk to me." And for the first time since I was a small boy, I broke. The carefully constructed walls of logic and emotional control that I had built around myself for decades came crashing down. I leaned heavily against the railing, the phone pressed to my ear, and a choked, ragged sob escaped my lips. I couldn't speak. I could only cry, the sound swallowed by the vast, indifferent night. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then David's voice came back, no longer sharp, but low, steady, and filled with a fierce, protective anger that was aimed not at me, but for me. "Don't move," he said, his voice like iron. "I'm on my way. I'll be there in the morning. We're done with this. We're done with the lies." I didn't know exactly what he meant, but as I stood there, listening to the dial tone after he hung up, a new feeling began to flicker in the darkness. It wasn't hope. It was something harder, something more real. It was the terrifying, liberating feeling of hitting rock bottom. There was nowhere to go but up. I didn't sleep that night. I drove back to my empty apartment downtown, a place I kept separate from the house in Westlake, my own personal decompression chamber, and paced the floor until the sun began to bleed over the horizon. Every so often, I'd check my phone, rereading my father's text, and then Uncle David's promise. One was a final confirmation of a lifetime of exclusion. The other was a lifeline. David arrived just before noon the next day, as promised. I heard the rumble of his ancient, beat-up Ford pickup truck before I saw it. He pulled into the visitor parking space, the truck looking wonderfully out of place amongst the Teslas and BMWs. He swung himself out of the cab, looking exactly as he always did. Worn leather boots, jeans splattered with a rainbow of paint, and a graying ponytail. But the usual easygoing warmth in his eyes was gone, replaced by a storm. He didn't say hello. He just walked up to me, pulled me into a rough, tight hug, and held on for a long moment. It wasn't a hug of pity. It was a hug of solidarity, of righteous anger. "I'm sorry, kid," he murmured into my shoulder. "I'm sorry I let it go on this long. I kept hoping your father would find his spine." He followed me up to my apartment, his eyes scanning the minimalist decor, the neat stacks of books on data science, the single abstract painting he'd sent me for my birthday hanging on the wall. He dropped a dusty duffel bag on the floor and went straight to my kitchen, pulling 2 beers from the fridge without asking. He handed one to me. "Tell me everything," he said, his voice low. And I did. I told him about the promotion, the hope, the meticulous planning of the dinner. I described the feeling of sitting at that round table, the empty chairs like silent judges. I showed him the text from my father. I relayed every detail with the detached precision of an analyst presenting a report, my voice flat, devoid of the emotion that was churning inside me. David listened without interrupting, his knuckles white around his beer bottle, his jaw tight. When I finished, he was silent for a long time, staring at the painting on the wall. "She painted that, you know," he said softly. "Not that specific one. That's my clumsy imitation. But she loved abstracts. She said it was like painting music." He took a long swallow of his beer. "Victoria hated her art. She called it messy. That's how she saw Eleanor. Messy, uncontrolled, a threat to the tidy little world she wanted to build." He stood up and walked over to his duffel bag. He unzipped it, but instead of pulling out clothes, he lifted out a heavy, worn, wooden box about the size of a shoebox. It was dark cherry wood, with intricate carvings on the lid. He placed it on the coffee table between us with a soft, definitive thud. "I've been holding on to this for 20 years, he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've gone back and forth 1,000 times about whether to give it to you. I thought it would be too painful. I thought it was your father's job to tell you the truth. But he's a coward. And last night was the final straw. You deserve to know who you are, Max. You deserve to know who your mother is." My heart started to pound, a heavy, frantic drum against my ribs. I stared at the box, a strange sense of both terror and recognition washing over me. It felt like I was looking at a missing piece of my own soul. "What is it?" I whispered. "It's the truth," David said simply. He lifted the lid. The box was filled to the brim with letters. Dozens of them, in envelopes of varying ages, some crisp, some yellowed and soft with time. On top of the letters was a stack of photographs held together with a rubber band, and a scattering of what looked like birthday cards. David reached in and picked up the top envelope. The postmark was from Boston, Massachusetts, and it was dated just a week ago. It was addressed in elegant, slanted handwriting to Max, at my father's address. "She never stopped writing, Max," David said, his voice cracking. "Not once. Every birthday, every Christmas, and dozens of times in between. She sent them to the house. For the first few years, your father would just write return to sender. But when he married Victoria, she started doing something worse. She kept them. She intercepted every single one. She didn't want you to have even a whisper of your mother. She wanted to erase her completely." He gestured to the box. "Eleanor and I kept in touch. When she realized you weren't getting her letters, she started sending them to me, asking me to hold on to them for you. For a day when you were old enough, strong enough, to handle it. I think that day is today." I reached into the box, my hand trembling, and picked up a photograph from the stack. It showed a young woman with a cascade of dark, curly hair and a brilliant, infectious smile. She was holding a toddler with a mess of dark hair and wide, curious eyes. My eyes. It was me. She was looking at the camera, but the little boy, me, was looking up at her with an expression of pure adoration. My mother, Eleanor. She wasn't the chaotic phantom I'd been taught to imagine. She was beautiful. She was real. And she was smiling. I felt the air leave my lungs, a dizzying rush of grief and rage, and a strange, burgeoning joy. 23 years of my life had been built on a lie. A deliberate, cruel, and calculated lie. My mother hadn't abandoned me. She had been stolen from me. I spent the rest of the day and most of the night with that box. Uncle David made a quiet exit, sensing I needed to be alone. "Take your time with it, kid," he'd said, his hand on my shoulder. "I'll be at a motel down the street. Call me when you're ready to decide what's next." What was next felt like a universe away. Right now, there was only the past, contained in this wooden vessel. I sat on the floor of my apartment, the contents of the box spread around me like the artifacts of a lost civilization. My civilization. I started with the earliest letters, the ones written in the first year after she was gone. The paper was thin, the ink slightly faded, her handwriting a frantic, desperate scrawl. "My dearest Max," the first one began, postmarked from a small town in New Hampshire. "I don't know if your father will even let you see this. My heart is breaking into a million pieces. Please know that leaving was not my choice. Victoria, she gave your father an ultimatum. Her or me. And he chose her. He chose his new peace over our messy life. But my life is nothing without you. You are my heartbeat. I will fight to get back to you. I promise. I love you more than all the colors in the sky. Love, Mom." Tears streamed down my face, hot and silent. I read letter after letter, piecing together the narrative they had so carefully dismantled. She hadn't just vanished. She had been forced out. Arthur, my father, in his grief and vulnerability, had been convinced by Victoria that Eleanor was a destructive force. They had used her postpartum depression, her artistic temperament, against her, painting her as an unfit mother. They changed the locks. They got a lawyer. They threatened to declare her mentally unstable and take me away permanently if she fought them. Young, alone, and with no resources, she had been checkmated. The letters tracked her journey. From New Hampshire, she moved to Boston, living in a tiny apartment, working 2 jobs to save money. She wrote about the art she was making, pouring her grief onto canvas. She wrote about starting night classes at a community college. "I'm studying art history, my love," one letter read, written on my 7th birthday. It came with a card that had a hand-drawn picture of a lopsided, 7-layered cake. "I know. It's funny, making art and studying it too. But I need to build a life, a real, stable life, so that one day I can come for you. So that no one can ever say I'm not good enough to be your mother. I miss your laugh. I miss the way you used to hide my paintbrushes. I hope you got the Lego set I sent to David for you. Happy birthday, my sweet boy." The Lego set. I remembered it vividly. A huge space station. It had arrived in a plain brown box, and Uncle David had said it was from him. He had been protecting me, but he had also been protecting her, honoring her love in the only way he could. As the years went on, the tone of the letters shifted. The frantic desperation eased into a resilient, determined ache. Her handwriting became steadier. She finished her associate's degree, then her bachelor's, then her master's. She wrote about her first teaching job at Boston College. She was no longer just surviving. She was building. But the love for me was a constant, throbbing pulse through every single word. "You'd be 16 today," she wrote in another. "Sweet 16. I wonder what you're like. Are you tall like your father? Do you still have that funny little cowlick at the back of your head? I bet you're smart. I bet you're kind. I saw a boy today who looked like he could have been you, and my heart just stopped for a second. I live for the day I can see you for real. I hope you're happy, Max. That's all I've ever wanted. For you to be happy." I picked up the photographs. There she was, standing proudly in a cap and gown, posing in front of a classroom whiteboard, in an art gallery next to one of her own paintings. She had aged, of course. Lines of experience and wisdom were etched around the same brilliant eyes from the baby picture. She had built a whole life without me, not because she wanted to, but because she had been forced to. And all the while, she had carried me with her. The rage I felt was a clean, pure flame. It wasn't the messy, confusing anger I'd felt at the restaurant. This was righteous. The sheer, calculated cruelty of what Victoria had done, stealing a mother from her child, and a child from his mother, was staggering. And my father had let her do it. He had traded his son's heart for a quiet life. I finally finished the last letter around 4 a.m. It was the one from last week. "My dearest Max," it concluded. "You're 28 now. A man. David tells me you're a brilliant data analyst in Austin. I am so incredibly proud of the man you've become, even from this impossible distance. The hope that I'll see you again has never died, but it's changed. I know I can't just show up on your doorstep. That wouldn't be fair to you. But I want you to know, if you ever find these letters, if you ever learn the truth, I'm here. I've always been here, waiting for you. All my love, forever. Your mother, Eleanor. I folded the letter and placed it carefully back in the box. I stood up, my body stiff from sitting on the floor for hours. I walked to the window and looked out at the pre-dawn sky. The world looked different. The data had been corrupted for my entire life, and now, finally, I had the clean data set. The narrative was clear. The signal was deafening. I picked up my phone and called Uncle David. He answered on the first ring. I'm ready, I said, my voice hoarse but steady. I'm ready to decide what's next. The drive to West Lake Hills felt like a journey to a foreign country. The familiar streets, the manicured lawns, the imposing houses, it all seemed alien, a life that belonged to someone else. I was no longer the boy trying to earn his way into this world. I was an emissary from a past they had tried to bury, and I was here to witness its excavation. Uncle David was in the passenger seat, a silent, solid presence. He didn't need to say anything. His being there was enough. We pulled into the long, curved driveway. Victoria's white Range Rover and my father's silver Audi were parked in their usual spots. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I knew they would be home. I killed the engine, and for a moment, we just sat in the silence, the house looming before us. You don't have to do this alone, David said, his gaze fixed on the front door. I know, I replied, my hand on the door handle. But I have to be the one to say the words. I walked up the stone pathway, David a few steps behind me. I didn't bother with the doorbell. I used my key, the key that had always felt like a privilege and not a right, and let myself in. They were in the great room, the one with the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the infinity pool. Arthur was reading the paper in his favorite leather armchair. Victoria was arranging a vase of sterile-looking white calla lilies on the coffee table. Leo and Chloe were sprawled on the floor, mesmerized by a tablet. It was a perfect domestic scene, a photograph from a high-end magazine. My entrance shattered the tableau. Victoria looked up first, her face tightening with annoyance. Max, I didn't realize you were coming over. And David, she added, her voice dropping a full octave as she saw my uncle behind me. What an unpleasant surprise. Arthur lowered his newspaper, his expression a mixture of confusion and alarm. Max, David, what's going on? I didn't answer him. I walked over to the glass coffee table and, with a deliberate movement, set the wooden box down in the space Victoria had just cleared. The sound echoed in the cavernous room. Victoria's eyes locked onto the box, and for the first time in my life, I saw a flicker of genuine fear in her face. Her mask of cool composure cracked. What is that? She demanded, her voice sharp. You know what it is, I said, my voice low and shaking with a controlled fury. I looked at my father. You both know. Arthur stood up, his face pale. He stared at the box as if it were a coffin. Max, I don't think. Don't. I cut him off, my voice rising. Don't you dare pretend you don't know. 23 years. 23 years of letters. Every birthday. Every Christmas. You stole my mother from me. I opened the lid of the box, revealing the contents. You stole her from me, and you replaced her with a ghost story. You let me believe she abandoned me. You let me grow up thinking I was unwanted. Victoria regained her composure, her fear hardening into defiance. That's absurd, she said, her laugh brittle. Your mother was an unstable woman. We were protecting you. Protecting me? I shot back, my voice raw. You weren't protecting me, Victoria. You were protecting yourself. You saw her as a threat, a loose end. So you cut her out. You erased her. Did you enjoy reading her letters? Did you enjoy knowing how much pain you were causing both of us? Her face flushed, a dark, ugly red. She looked at Arthur, her eyes demanding his support. Arthur, are you going to let him speak to me this way? My father wouldn't look at me. He was staring at the letters, his hands trembling. He looked like a man watching his carefully constructed life crumble into dust. Max, it was complicated, he stammered. I thought it was for the best. The best for who, Dad? I asked, the word Dad tasting like poison in my mouth. The best for you? The best for your quiet, easy life with your new wife? Was it the best for the 5-year-old boy who cried himself to sleep for a month, asking where his mommy went? Was it? He flinched as if I'd slapped him. He had no answer. There was no answer. David finally spoke, his voice a low growl. You're a coward, Arthur. Always have been. You let this woman poison your mind and your heart. You threw away the best thing that ever happened to you because you were scared, and you sacrificed your own son's happiness to do it. I told you you'd regret it. Well, here it is. The rest of your life. I turned my back on them, unable to look at their faces any longer. I looked at Leo and Chloe, who were now staring at the scene, their eyes wide with confusion. They didn't understand. They were just children, products of this toxic environment. I felt a brief pang of pity for them. I'm leaving, I said, my voice clear and final. I'm going to Boston to meet my mother. The mother you told me didn't want me. I'm going to have the relationship with her that you stole from us. I took my house key out of my pocket and placed it on top of the box of letters. I don't need this anymore. I'm done trying to find a place in this house. I'm done trying to earn your love. I turned and walked towards the door, David right behind me. Max, wait. Arthur's voice was desperate. He took a step towards me. I stopped but didn't turn around. Don't go, he pleaded. We can fix this. I finally turned to face him, the man I had spent my life trying to please. I saw the desperation in his eyes, the terror of losing control, of his lies being exposed. But I didn't see love. I saw selfishness. No, you can't, I said, my voice devoid of heat, filled only with a vast, empty calm. You can't fix this. Because to fix it, you would have had to have been a father. And you weren't. You were just the man I lived with. I walked out the door and didn't look back. As we got into David's truck and pulled away from the curb, I felt a profound sense of release, as if a massive weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The past was a ruin behind me. The future, for the first time in my life, was an open road. The 2 days that followed the confrontation were a whirlwind of methodical deconstruction. Quitting my job was the first and easiest step. I walked into my CEO's office, explained that a family matter required me to relocate to Boston immediately, and tendered my resignation. He was shocked and disappointed, even tried to offer me a transfer to their Boston office, but I politely declined. The life I had built in Austin, the career I had used as a shield and a sword, was inextricably linked to the lie. I needed a clean break. Chrysalis was complete, but my own metamorphosis was just beginning. Packing up my apartment felt like archiving a former self. The data science textbooks, the framed articles about my project's success, the sleek, minimalist furniture, it all belonged to the Max who believed his value was measured in achievements. I sold what I could and packed the rest into boxes, leaving only Uncle David's paintings and the precious wooden box of letters to be carefully transported. David was my co-pilot through the chaos, making coffee, ordering pizza, and offering the quiet, steady presence of someone who understood that I was simultaneously grieving a life and giving birth to a new one. The hardest part was the phone call. After 2 days of sorting through my past, it was time to reach out to my future. I sat on the floor of my nearly empty apartment, the wooden box in my lap, and stared at the phone number on Eleanor's last letter. My heart hammered against my ribs. What would I say? How do you start a conversation that is 23 years late? David, seeing my hesitation, sat down beside me. She's been waiting for this call her whole life, kid. There are no wrong words. I took a deep breath, my finger hovering over the screen. I pressed the call button. It rang once, twice. My stomach twisted into a knot. Maybe she wouldn't answer. Maybe it was too soon. Hello. A woman's voice. It was warm, clear, and questioning. It was a voice I didn't know, but somehow, on a cellular level, I recognized it. I froze. The words I had rehearsed evaporated. Hello, she repeated, a note of concern in her voice. Is this Eleanor Vance? I finally managed, my own voice sounding foreign and strained. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. A pause so heavy it felt like it contained decades. Who is this? She whispered. My name is Max, I said, my voice breaking on my own name. I think you're my mother. A sound escaped her, a choked sob that was half gasp, half cry. It was the sound of a hope, long nurtured and nearly extinguished, suddenly bursting into flame. Oh my God, she breathed. Max, is it really you? Is it really you? It's me, I said, tears now streaming freely down my face. I got your letters. All of them. Uncle David gave them to me. David, she whispered, her voice thick with gratitude. He kept his promise. We didn't say much more in that first call. We were both overwhelmed, crying and laughing at the same time. The conversation was a mosaic of fractured sentences and emotional sounds. But we made a plan. I was flying to Boston in 2 days. She would meet me at the airport. The flight from Austin to Boston was a strange, suspended passage of time. I was leaving behind everything I had ever known: the heat, the hills, the sterile house, the career I had built. I was flying towards a woman who was both a complete stranger and the most fundamental part of me. I looked out the window at the patchwork of the country below, feeling like a data point that had been unmoored from its graph, hurtling through space towards a new, unknown axis. Uncle David drove me to the airport. He pulled his truck up to the departures curb and put it in park. He turned to me, his eyes shining. "This is it, kid. This is the beginning." "I'm terrified," I admitted. "Good," he said with a grin. "Being terrified means you're alive. Now go meet your mom." He pulled me into another one of his rough, grounding hugs. "You tell Eleanor I'll be out to visit as soon as you two have had some time. The three of us have a lot of years to make up for." I walked into the airport, my single suitcase and a carry-on containing the wooden box, my only possessions. As I went through security and walked towards my gate, I felt a lightness I had never known. I wasn't running away from something. I was running towards it. I was finally, after 28 years, going home. Logan Airport was a chaotic symphony of reunions and farewells. People were hugging, crying, laughing, their stories intersecting for brief, fleeting moments. I stood near the baggage claim, my hands sweating, my eyes scanning the crowd for a face I only knew from photographs. Every woman with dark, curly hair made my heart leap. My phone buzzed. A text from her. "I'm by the Dunkin' Donuts. I have a red scarf. I'm so nervous I think I might levitate." The simple, human honesty of the text made me smile. I spotted the flash of a red scarf near the coffee shop. And then I saw her. She was older than in the last photograph, her dark hair now threaded with silver at the temples. But she was unmistakable. The same intelligent, searching eyes. The same expressive mouth. She was holding a small, hand-drawn sign that just said, "Max." Our eyes met across the crowded terminal, and the rest of the world seemed to fall away. It was like looking into a mirror that reflected not just my face, but my history, my biology, my soul. She took a tentative step forward, and then another. I started walking towards her, my suitcase forgotten behind me. We met in the middle of the bustling walkway, an island of stillness in a sea of motion. She dropped the sign, her hands flying to her mouth, her eyes welling with tears. "You have my eyes," she whispered, the exact words Uncle David had used for years. "I know," I said, my own voice choked. And then we were hugging. It wasn't the awkward, hesitant embrace of strangers. It was a collision of years of longing, a desperate, clinging hug that was full of grief and joy and a profound sense of rightness. I buried my face in her shoulder, inhaling the scent of her perfume, something clean and citrusy, and I felt a fundamental piece of myself click into place. It was the feeling of a key finally finding its lock. This was my mother. "I can't believe you're real," she sobbed into my jacket. "I've imagined this moment for so long. I was afraid it was just a dream." "I'm real," I promised, holding her tighter. "I'm here." We finally pulled apart, both of us laughing through our tears, wiping our eyes with the backs of our hands. We just stood there for a moment, drinking each other in, two halves of a whole, finally reunited. She drove us from the airport towards Cambridge, where she lived. The city was a world away from Austin. Old brick buildings stood shoulder to shoulder with modern glass structures, and the air had a crisp, autumnal bite. She pointed out landmarks as we drove, her voice animated, but we both knew we were just filling the space, the real conversation still waiting to happen. Her apartment was on the third floor of a beautiful old brownstone, overlooking a street lined with trees whose leaves were just beginning to turn. The inside was filled with books, art, and light. Unlike the cold, curated perfection of my father's house, this place felt lived in, loved. Paintings, some of them her own, covered the walls. Stacks of books teetered on every available surface. A half-finished weaving sat on a loom in the corner. It was the home of an artist, a thinker. It was her. She made us tea, her hands trembling slightly as she poured the water. We sat at a small wooden table in her kitchen, the silence between us no longer awkward, but full of 1,000 unasked questions. "Tell me everything," she said, her voice soft. "Start from the beginning. I want to know it all. The good, the bad. I want to know the man you've become." And so I told her. I told her about the house in West Lake, the subtle exclusions, the feeling of being a ghost at the feast. I told her about my work, my passion for finding patterns in the chaos. I told her about the promotion, the disastrous dinner, and the box of letters that had changed everything. I talked for hours, the words pouring out of me, a lifetime of suppressed feelings finding their voice. She listened with an intensity that was almost painful. She cried when I told her about the Disney World trip. Her hands clenched into fists when I described Victoria's quiet manipulations. And when I finished, she reached across the table and took my hands in hers. "I am so sorry, Max," she said, her eyes filled with a pain that mirrored my own. "I am so sorry I wasn't there to protect you. I tried. God, I tried. But they had all the power, all the money. I was just a 25-year-old girl with a broken heart." She then told me her side of the story, filling in the gaps the letters had left. She spoke of her love for my father and her heartbreak when he chose his new life over theirs. She spoke of the agonizing decision to leave, knowing a legal battle would only hurt me more. She spoke of the years of struggle, of building a life from scratch, all of it fueled by the desperate hope that one day she would earn her way back to me. As the sun set, casting long shadows across her cozy kitchen, the last vestiges of the ghost story I had been told my whole life finally dissolved. In its place was the truth, complex and painful, but real. I wasn't the son of a woman who had abandoned me. I was the son of a woman who had survived, a woman who had fought, a woman who had waited. "I'm not going back to Austin," I said, the decision solidifying in my heart as I spoke the words aloud. "I want to stay here, if that's okay." Her face broke into the most beautiful smile I had ever seen, a smile of pure, unadulterated joy. "Okay," she said, squeezing my hands. "Max, my darling boy, you're home." The weeks that followed our reunion were a masterclass in building a relationship from the ground up, a delicate and joyful process of discovery. Staying in Boston was the easiest decision I'd ever made. Eleanor insisted I take her spare room, a cozy space filled with books and a view of the changing autumn leaves. "Stay as long as you need," she'd said. A week, a year, a lifetime. For the first time, an offer of a home felt like a genuine welcome, not a begrudging obligation. I set about the practical task of building a new life with the same focus I'd once applied to my work. I knew I couldn't, and wouldn't, rely on Eleanor financially. I needed to stand on my own 2 feet, not as her long-lost son, but as a capable adult. Boston's tech scene was vibrant, and my resume, even without the director title, was strong. Within 3 weeks, I had gone through a whirlwind of interviews and accepted a position as a senior data scientist at a biotech firm in Cambridge. The work was fascinating, using predictive analytics to model protein folding, and it paid even better than my job in Austin. It was a validation that came from my own merit, a crucial step in defining my new identity. But the real work was personal. Eleanor and I spent our evenings and weekends piecing together the mosaic of our lives. We'd walk along the Charles River, the crisp air invigorating, and she would tell me stories of my early childhood, memories I had long since buried. She told me my first word was light, that I was obsessed with the color yellow, and that I used to laugh hysterically whenever she pretended to trip over things. These small, precious data points filled in the vast, empty spaces of my personal history. In return, I shared my own life with her. I showed her the code for the chrysalis project, explaining the logic, and to my surprise, she followed along with rapt attention, her artist's mind seeing the patterns and beauty in the structure. "It's like a sculpture made of logic," she'd said, and in that moment, I felt seen in a way my own father, the architect, had never been able to see me. We found our shared spaces. We both loved old jazz records, strong black coffee, and the quiet satisfaction of solving a difficult puzzle. For me, it was a data problem. For her, a complex passage in a book she was translating. In her apartment, surrounded by her art and her books, I felt a sense of belonging that the cavernous house in Westlake had never provided. This wasn't just a place to sleep. It was a place my soul could rest. Uncle David came to visit a month after I arrived, his old truck making the cross-country pilgrimage. The reunion between him and Eleanor was a sight to behold. They hugged for a full minute, 2 old soldiers who had fought a long war on separate fronts, finally reunited in victory. That night, the 3 of us cooked dinner together in Eleanor's kitchen. We drank wine, told old stories, and laughed until our sides hurt. As I watched my mother and my uncle, The two people who had loved me unconditionally from afar, now together in the same room. My heart felt so full I thought it might burst. This was it. This was family. Not a group of people bound by a shared roof and a loveless obligation, but a constellation of individuals connected by love, loyalty, and choice. Eleanor had a small community garden plot a few blocks from her apartment. One brisk Saturday, she took me there. It was a small square of earth where she grew tomatoes, herbs, and surprisingly resilient-looking kale. "Your father hated getting his hands dirty," she said, handing me a trowel. "But I always found it grounding." We spent the afternoon turning the soil, preparing it for winter. As I dug my hands into the cool, dark earth, I felt a connection to a part of myself I never knew existed. The part of me that was Eleanor's son, the son of a woman who found beauty in messy, living things. It was a profound and peaceful feeling. I was finally building a life based on a true foundation. The Max in Austin had been defined by a negative space, by the love he lacked. The Max in Boston was being defined by the love he had. It was a fundamental shift in my personal algorithm, a reprogramming from the core. I was no longer an echo or a ghost. I was a signal, bright and clear. 6 months after I moved to Boston, as the city was shrugging off the last of the winter chill and hinting at the promise of spring, I received a message. It wasn't a text or a call, but a formal, hesitant email from a name I hadn't seen in my inbox in a long time. Arthur. The subject line was simply Max. I stared at it for a long moment, my finger hovering over the delete button. A familiar, reflexive knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. But it was different now. It was a dull ache, not a sharp pain. I was no longer that boy waiting for a sign of approval. I took a breath, opened the email, and read it with the detached curiosity of an analyst examining a historical data point. "Max," it began, the tone stilted and awkward. "I know I have no right to ask for anything from you. What happened, the things that were done? I have been living with the weight of it every day since you left. David was right. I was a coward. I let Victoria's fear and my own desire for an easy life destroy something precious. I have lost my son. I live with that regret every moment." He went on to say that he and Victoria were in counseling, but that things were difficult. He mentioned that he had reached out to Eleanor through a lawyer to offer a formal apology, which she had accepted with quiet grace, but no invitation for further contact. The email ended with a plea. "I don't expect forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. But I hope that one day you might be willing to speak with me. I would like to hear about your mother. I would like to hear about your life. Your father, Arthur." I read the email twice, then closed my laptop. 6 months ago, a message like this would have sent me into a tailspin. It would have been the validation I had spent my entire life craving. But now, it felt like an echo from a distant star, its light only just reaching me, the event itself long since past. The rage and pain had dissipated, leaving behind a kind of calm, sad clarity. He wasn't a monster. He was just a weak man who had made a series of devastatingly selfish choices. His pain was real, but it was a prison of his own making, and I no longer had the key, nor the desire to find it. I did not reply to the email. My silence was its own answer. My new life was my response. That weekend, to celebrate my 29th birthday, Eleanor, Uncle David, and I drove up the coast to Maine. We rented a small cabin overlooking a rocky, windswept shore. There was no grand party, no expensive restaurant. Instead, we built a bonfire on the beach, bundled in sweaters and blankets against the sea breeze. David played his guitar, old folk songs that mingled with the sound of the crashing waves. Eleanor read a poem by Mary Oliver, and I, for the first time on my birthday, felt purely and completely happy. As we sat there, watching the flames dance against the darkening sky, Eleanor pulled a small, wrapped gift from her bag. It was a leather-bound journal and a fountain pen. "For your thoughts," she said softly. "You have so many beautiful ones. They deserve a home." I looked from the journal in my hands to the two faces glowing in the firelight, my mother, my uncle, my family. I realized that my entire life had been a search for the right algorithm for happiness, for belonging. I thought it was a complex equation of achievement and approval. But I was wrong. The solution was much simpler. It was about subtraction, not addition. It was about removing the variables of falsehood and fear, and being left with the simple, elegant constant of unconditional love. My journey wasn't about finding a long-lost mother. It was about finding myself, a self that had been buried under years of someone else's narrative. The truth didn't just set me free, It allowed me to exist in the first place. To anyone out there who feels like a ghost in their own life, like a data point that doesn't fit the curve, my advice is this: question the narrative. Seek your own data. The truth is often buried, not because it is shameful, but because it is powerful. And its power is that it's yours. Family isn't about the house you live in or the name you share. It's about the people who see you, the ones who choose to love you not in spite of your complexities, but because of them. It's the people who will fly across the country when you're at your lowest, who will keep your history safe for you until you're ready, who will welcome you home after a lifetime away. I don't know what the future holds, but I know who I am. I am Max, son of Eleanor, nephew of David. I am a man who loves jazz and the sea and the elegant beauty of a clean line of code. I am no longer an echo. I am a voice. And I am finally at peace.